Good morning, everyone. I am pleased to welcome you all to today's panel discussion titled
Hi.
Beyond the Preliminary Report: Systemic Failures, Design Defects, and the Question of Accountability in Aviation Safety, conducted by the Peninsula Foundation. I am Bhavana, a research assistant at TPF, and I will be your MC for this session. Before we begin, I would like to outline a few housekeeping rules. Participants, do ensure that your microphones remain muted throughout the session unless you are invited to speak. You may post your questions in the chat box during the Q&A session, which will take place at the end of the discussion. Today's session will be recorded and uploaded to TPF's official YouTube channel. We kindly request that you refrain from sharing any snippets without prior permission. Thank you. With that, we will now begin. On 12th June 2025, Air India's London-bound flight AI-171 crashed immediately after takeoff, leading to the death of 241 people on board, including 12 crew members. One passenger survived miraculously. This accident has raised many questions. Today's discussion examines the evolving civil aviation landscape, particularly how companies such as Boeing, with a demonstrated decline in professional excellence, have contributed to lapses in aviation safety. This session aims to assess how the profit maximization culture has hindered aviation standards and safety decision making across airlines. Recent Boeing related incidents have exposed serious shortcomings in safety oversight, transparency, and corporate accountability. This discussion will focus on how weak regulations and commercial pressures have undermined safety standards and will emphasize the importance of aviation authorities and industry stakeholders in preventing accidents and prioritizing passenger safety over profit. For this, we have invited an esteemed panel of speakers joining us today. I'd first like to welcome Captain Ajit Apte. Captain Ajit Apte is a distinguished IAF veteran who retired as Group Captain and transitioned to civil aviation after flying over 6,000 hours in the Indian Air Force. He is an experimental test pilot and a 1971 war veteran. After flying for Taneja Aviation and SpiceJet, he joined Jet Airways and served as commander until his retirement at age 65. He has over 18,000 hours of airline flying, including 10,000 hours on all Boeing 737 variants and the remainder on the Airbus A330 aircraft. He is now an instructor with CAE on the flight simulator. Welcome, Captain. Next, I'd like to invite Ms. Rachel Chitra, who is an investigative journalist working at outlets such as Reuters, Forbes, and the Times of India. Her reporting has uncovered issues with the PM CARES Fund, CAA, and migrant deaths during the COVID-19 lockdown. Her work has been cited by the BBC and GIJN, referenced by the opposition in Parliament, and submitted as evidence before the Supreme Court. Most recently, she published a four-part investigative series for the Federal and an in-depth analysis for Frontline on the Air India 171 crash and its safety implications. Welcome, ma'am. Next, I'd like to invite Captain Amit Singh, who is a veteran aviator, safety expert, and author with 25 years of diverse experience in civil aviation. He has flown over 12,000 hours on Boeing 777 and Airbus A320. He has been associated with two successful startup airlines in India, namely Indigo and AirAsia. He is the founder of Safety Matters Foundation, India's only independent aviation safety think tank committed to advancing data-driven safety practices, regulatory reform, and public awareness. He is also the author of Mindfly, Foley's Realities and Human Factors, and Varaha, Hunnic Migration to Hind, Defenders of Bharat Lost in History. Welcome, Captain. Finally, I'd like to invite Mr. S. Raghutam, who is an independent journalist and strategic analyst with over 20 years of experience in newspapers, online media, and think tanks. He has written, edited, and managed editorial teams at newspapers, including the Deccan Herald, Times of India, Indian Express, Vijay Times, Deccan Chronicle, as well as think tanks such as CDISS, UK, and IDSA, New Delhi. He is a recipient of the 2012 Chevening Scholarship at the University of Oxford and holds an MA with distinction in Defense and Security Analysis from Lancaster University. Welcome, sir. Our moderator for today's session is Air Marshal M. Matheshwaran, founder and president of the Peninsula Foundation, a former Deputy Chief of Integrated Defense Staff and Senior Air Staff Officer of the Eastern Air Command. He served 39 years in the Indian Air Force. He holds a PhD in Defense and Strategic Studies from the University of Madras and is a senior fellow in international and national security at Harvard Kennedy School of Governance. He writes extensively on aerospace, defense, geopolitics, and national security.
Thank you, Bhavna. And it's a great pleasure to have the experts with us, brilliant experts. And let's get on to the topic immediately, because this is a classic issue that's already dealing with not just a catastrophic accident that is needs to be investigated in totality and transparently, but it also brings in uh, the business interests, commercial interests, geopolitics, and very largely from the media angle, an issue that we need to see, which is perception management. The latest Bloomberg article is a classic example of that as well. But let me first start with Captain Akte. Ajit sir, we need to look at first in the context of Boeing's, and you've flown the Boeing variants for such a long time, and even as a test pilot, we look at things more intimately from the design perspective, even when we just get into flying straight away. So, uh, given the track record of what happened with 737 Max, and given that 787 Dreamliner was when it began with the development and flight testing, it was stated to be a game changer and a milestone, much like how the F-16 was seen as fighter pilot's dream in 1978, 787, and pretty much the same name as Dreamliner, and it's called as all-electric aircraft almost. So, given what happened in 737 Max, what should be the first, uh, you know, sort of concern that should come to not just the general public, but even the investigation agencies in terms of which is the first area they would look at? Is the design issues, or straight away we look at pilot error, which seems to be the tendency on most accidents? So, how do you look at the complexities of design in 787, and how do you link that to the past experience on 737 Max as well? And I will, after Captain Akshay, I will ask Rachel. She's done an exceptional investigative journalism on this issue, and she will throw light on what are the important observations she's actually flagged. And four of her articles have been published in the Federal, and the fifth one in Hindu. Uh, these raise very, very significant questions, and we will, look at some of the critical ones, and then we'll follow up on to Captain Amit, who's got extensive, experience in looking at from the safety angle, both from the technical as well as the flight safety angle. And then, of course, the geopolitical angle, we will bring in Mr. Raghutam with his larger geopolitical perspectives that are in play in this particular case as well. So I would request each of the panelists to uh, give the initial comments for 6 to 7 minutes. Then we will move on to the discussions in a conversational mode. Ajit sir, you can start with your first initial comments.
Many thanks, Matsi. Thank you very much. And good morning to everyone. You've given me a huge, vast canvas on which to talk about, but that be what it is. Let's stick only to Boeing and the related problems. Otherwise, it will just carry on ad infinitum. Starting point is let's go a little back into history. The Wilbur and Orville Wright flew only in 1905, so it's only 121 years ago. Of these 121 years, Boeing has been producing aeroplanes for 112 years. They were the most respected aeroplane manufacturing company in the world, and they, to be fair to them, have produced a large number of winners. Like the Jumbo ruled the roost as queen of the skies for half a century. Now, what happened to them all of a sudden is the fundamental issue. And there are lots of things that did happen. Now, when it came to Boeing itself, they were a great engineering company. They did a great engineering job. In the process, they made good aeroplanes, they made profit, and they were quite happy. And the first thing that we realized that things were not going too well was with the Boeing 737 MAX as it came about. When the MAX came about and there were these two accidents, it's only when investigation began and started going deeper into it, they realized that the whole design of the MAX was a series of shortcuts. And if they had gone to a fresh sheet and a new aircraft, I am reasonably confident none of this would have happened. But this happened because they wanted to give the 737 grandfather rights, maybe under pressure from their various customers, and to keep it a Boeing 737. Now, with it, Boeing 737-100 to the Boeing 737 MAX are two totally different aeroplanes. They've stretched the aircraft in length, breadth, engines, height, and so on. And in the process, during flight testing with the 737 MAX, they found they were running into a problem of negative longitudinal stability. So to deal with it, they had two choices: an aerodynamic solution or a software solution by introducing some amount of authority to a computer over flight controls, which was something that had never ever happened all the way up to the Boeing 737-900. They did it. It was a poorly engineered solution. They did not include any of these data in the flight FCOM, which is the operator's manual. Now, flight crew operator's manual. Now, that is something which is ethically wrong and it's a criminal problem. Here, you had a system which is going to interfere with the flying qualities of the aircraft, and the pilot was blissfully unaware that there is one little gremlin sitting at the back who's going to take over if he approaches the stall. Nothing was given in it. Then that itself was a poorly engineered solution. But that is irrelevant to the AI 171. So we leave it at that, that it was a poorly engineered solution. Then how did it pass muster? At this juncture, one needs to again go back into history. FAA at that juncture, soon after that is 2007-8, when huge number of orders started coming in onto manufacturers, wanted an increase in budget to increase the number of inspectors and so on, which was denied. So you won't believe this, but FAA actually hived off part of their regulatory functions onto manufacturers because they were good manufacturers. So Boeing could design an aircraft and also clear it as far as parts of it on the regulatory side. Now the 737 MAX had this problem. They were they had two fatal crashes, and this happened. So the point is, when did this begin? When did the poor engineering begin? It is about the time when Boeing acquired McDonnell Douglas, and the people who were juniors over there had risen to the level of seniors, and whose job now, who actually took it upon themselves to maximize profits by raising the stock value of the company. And that is where it all began. So now we leave the 737 out and come to the uh, Dreamliner. Yes, it was technologically supposed to be a game changer. Like, it's hard to believe that the hydraulic systems all along so far, we've come across hydraulic system on aircraft which were powered by engine driven pumps, and you had a small electrical driven pump. Whereas the Boeing 787, the complete hydraulics are electrically driven. The pumps are electrically driven. Okay, so it was an all electric aeroplane. Now, if you're an all electric aircraft, you run into problems uh, of what can happen if there's a short circuit or if something causes a short circuit. Well, those are things, well, they equal to having a hydraulic leak and so on, but this was something totally new. They also went in for lithium ion batteries. The lithium ion batteries caused the 787 huge problems because of which it suffered a grounding. And eventually they were confronted with a problem: either go back to nickel cadmium batteries or lithium ion. They'd have had to pay a penalty in terms of weight of all of 21 kilos. But they would have had to undergo the entire process of certification. So they stuck to the lithium ion batteries. The solution they found was they made a casing. It's like having a nuclear reactor with a big casing around it so that if there is a fire, it doesn't go out. But the problem of overheating and the fire on the lithium ions has never been sorted out, even today. Now, what happened with 787. Now, there are the what is known in the public domain is this aircraft took off. Soon after takeoff, it crashed. It is now established that he lost power on both the engines. Now, whether the power was intentionally shut down or it lost because of a failure is what they've got to determine. Intentionally shutting down, people have hinted towards a suicide theory, but that should, in all fairness, be the very last thing because you have to give the guys sitting in the right and left seat the due that they do not suffer from suicidal tendencies.
Mm.
Having said that, why did the engines shut down? Now, it was good weather. The engines didn't ingest anything. There were no birds, like what happened to Captain Sullenberger's aircraft. So, what is it that could have caused it? Now, these engines are very, very high performance engines. They're extremely efficient. Once again, to go back into history, if you remember the old Goblin engine that we flew, you are the only guy who could start the engine. You are the only guy who could shut down the engine. Nobody else had the authority to do it. That remained the case for a long time till technology developed and engines have started now operating so close to their damage margins that if it is left to the pilot to watch it, see it is exceeding limits, and then shut it down, the engine is most likely going to exceed limits. So, and electronics have developed and matured. So they've got this little box at the back. Shall we call
Mm.
it the engine control unit or a FADIC as it's generally called, which stands for Full Authority Digital Engine Control. This guy is sitting at the back. When you start the engine, this guy decides when fuel should, at what correct RPM should it start giving in fuel, in the sense that can vary from day to day, from start to start, in the sense that you start the start cycle. For how many seconds this will motor to build up speed, how, when the fuel will be introduced is all decided by this guy sitting at the back. So
Mm.
when he
Excellent.
decides to inject fuel and the fuel starts off and the light up occurs, if the temperature is likely to exceed limit, he can cut down the engine. So here's the first step where an outside agency can actually shut down the engine.
Mm.
Now, most modern engines do have FADIC, and it all depends now how much authority you're giving the FADIC. So take a 737 MAX with the LEAP 1 engines. The FADIC has authority to kill the engine without pilot intervention only during start if it's likely to exceed limit. Only during start if the start cycle is going to exceed limit. But once the engine is running stabilized, the FADIC cannot shut it down. Now, wonder of wonders, this engine, which the 787 has, the FADIC has the authority to shut it down even in the air without pilot intervention. Now, that is something which is completely new. So there are occasions if there is a major electrical problem in the FADIC, it can shut down the engine anywhere.
Wasn't
Now,
this aware? I mean, this is a serious design, conceptually designed by, it's a wrong.
sorry?
Conceptually, from a design point of view, it is a
Yeah,
serious flaw.
I
So how
don't
did they
know
take
if it
care of
is a
that?
flaw. Yeah, I don't know if it is a flaw or not. But what is happening is today, engines are operating at temperatures at which by rights the turbine should have melted. They're operating at such high temperatures. Now, when you're operating at such high temperatures, it takes just a wee bit of time for it to go beyond the limit to cause it permanent damage. And therefore, they've given FADIC the authority that before it causes damage, kill the engine. That
Hmm.
has happened. And the technology seems to have matured. Okay, so it's happening. The problem is if when are the what are the conditions under which such a thing can happen? If there is a major electrical failure. Now, major electrical failures are very rare because you have large number of generating sources. So there is a backup and a backup to a backup and a backup to a backup and so on. So a total failure is quite frankly a statistically remote probability. Under such conditions, what is it that can cause such a backup? That is one. If such a thing has happened, what are the things that could have caused it? Now things have started emerging that finally Boeing, both at Everett in Seattle and Charleston in South Carolina, they are only the final assembly people. The parts are all made by various different organizations. Like the landing gears made by Messier Bugatti, engines are made by GE, and instruments are made by somebody else, and they assemble them. There is a documented fact of a problem that the plumbing for the toilets, which carries wastewater, is made by somebody else. They are not made to the correct specs. So there is a chance of water leaking from the toilet. So FAA has issued an advisory for people to say, hey guys, please check at whatever the interval spelled out to make sure that there is no leak. But the problem of preventing the leak hasn't been sorted out. You're only telling a guy to check that there is no leak. Now, where does the water leak to? Normally, on most airliners, including the 330, which was the most modern that I flew, the electronics bay was right under the flight deck. So it gave you access from the flight deck, it gave you access from underneath. But with this all electric aircraft, the electronic bays have stretched all the way up to the tail. And in the tail, they are right below the aft lavatories. There have been cases with water leaking in. Now, if water leaks into the electronics bay and causes a major electrical short circuit, the FADEC will shut the engines down.
So there is so Ajit, I'll come back to you on this. So there's a quite obviously it raises few questions. Very important questions is that is there adequate redundancy in the aircraft built in from the point of design development stage itself? That's one. And second, if as you pointed out, there are different standards and fallen standards of different suppliers of various components and various equipment. The ball finally stops at the design system integrator, which is the Boeing, and they should have actually seen into that as well. We'll come to that, but let's look at that. It raises a serious question of one is Boeing's change in work culture and the 737 MAX history, and that should actually raise a lot of questions even in 787. But in terms of redundancy and now the pilot operating the fuel cutoff switch, there are a lot of questions that are being raised. And let's look at what Rachel has actually raised some of these issues. Rachel?
This crash, Boeing from the beginning is playing Boeing, Air India, and DGCA and the AIB. What they're hoping to do is like play on the misinformation. So they have put out a narrative, and I would call the AIB report a narrative because it very selectively discloses facts. So what they're hoping, what they're betting on is that people don't have enough information to make up their judgment about what happened with the crash. So among the first things that people need to know is that VTANB comes from a family, like it's line number 26. It is the 26th aircraft in production. The 26th, and Air India was one of the first customers for Boeing. Now, before this, the predecessors to VTANB, the crash flight, they've had multiple problems. Some of them did not even make it out of the factory in Everett, Washington. They had deep structural flaws, and delivery for many of these planes was pushed back by months, years even. So this plane has had a history, this plane and its series, at least the early Dreamliners, had a history of electrical failures. Now you fast forward to what happened on this crash flight. 3 years before this plane failed, there has been whistleblowers have given evidence now to the US Senate that there was a massive fire in January 2022 power distribution panel P100, and that's like a circuit breaker. Also, there was a circuit, among the things that were involved were circuit breakers and the fault monitoring, which is all related to the core network. Now, apart from this, there was also an issue with the common core system in the same flight in April 2022, and this is also the evidence that's been submitted to the US Senate. And the petition itself starts off, what they have submitted to the US Senate starts that the maiden flight of this plane, the maiden flight itself had problems. Now, this issue that happened in April 2022 with the common core system repeated itself again on the day of the crash. because Boeing warned in an internal document that I have access to and which media refuses to publish, but refuses or is very disinclined to publish any information I have. So the internal Boeing document that I have shows clearly that Boeing internally warned that a single component failure in the common core system can take down multiple systems. And this common core is your core computers. So fly-by-wire itself deals with the core computers, and these core computers are the engine compute source for everything, including your flight control logic and your engine logic. And that had an issue. That had an issue in 2022. That issue never went away. It resurfaced on the crash day. And how it resurfaced was, remember I mentioned a Boeing document from 2014, which said that a single component failure can affect multiple systems. A single component failure in the common core system can affect multiple systems. Now, one of those systems was the core network. And so imagine in the AIB report mentions that the nitrogen generation system, the fire inerter on the plane, which keeps the fuel tanks inert, that was marked as high risk. It was a Cat A MEL. But your core network, which is the data backbone for the entire plane, gets marked as a Cat C medium risk fault. This itself shows that Boeing's history of lying to the regulators never changed. Just like how it lied to the regulators, to pilots, to maintenance about MCAS during the MAX 737 crashes, in this case, it has highly minimized the damage that an inoperative core network can do to your flight. So you see that in the run up to the crash, the 3 days to the crash, every single system started failing one after the other. So the first system that failed was your core network. By day 2 also failed, and this was on a particular line called the R2 line. So if you know your jets, like the engines not just produce thrust forward propulsion, but they also are powering all your electrical systems on the plane. So L1, L2 are from the left engine's generators, and R1, R2 are from the right engine's generators. So on R2, multiple systems kept getting knocked out. One was the nitrogen generation system. Then on the day of the crash, on the previous flight, which is AI423, what happened was the stabilizer motor control unit got knocked out. And the engineer, so as per my sources tell me that the people doing the maintenance were getting alarmed at the number of systems that were failing along the R2 line, because for this horizontal motor stabilizer control unit, the R2 was not its primary electrical path, it was its secondary electrical path, which means the system had already decided that L2 was an unclean source of energy, so let me route it to R2. And R2 also wasn't too good, because anyway it got knocked out with the power surge. So imagine they replaced the wiring, the motor control unit, and the sensors on the plane, but detected a sensor issue. Why tell us only what the pilot said? That's selective disclosure of data. Why don't you tell us what the maintenance found out? Why don't you tell us what the maintenance replaced? So imagine this stabilizer motor control unit is a flight critical failure. You had a flight critical failure 1.5 hours before the crash, and you don't inform the public about it. And then guess what? This flight critical failure was detected by 3 flight control modules, FCM left, right, and center. And 15 minutes before takeoff, 2 minutes before taxi clearance, all these 3 flight control modules started faulting. So now, and this is like a remember the Boeing document which warned one component failure can affect multiple systems? That happening, because 15 minutes failing, the flight control modules, all 3 started faulting. I will correct myself. The BPCUs were faulting, not failing. They were faulting. They were sending up alerts. But still, these were multi-domain system alerts, because at 15 minutes before takeoff, all your systems, which is your processors, your fault monitoring, your aft zonal dryer, multiple systems were screaming alerts. And yet, the pilots were not alerted. The pilots were not warned. The cockpit was blind to how the plane was unraveling beneath their feet. And then you had your takeoff. Now this takeoff, there is only a 9-second window of failure. And that 9-second window of failure, whatever should have failed, would have failed within this 9 seconds, which is between V1 speed, which is 080833, and between 080842, that maximum recorded airspeed. It has to be before that. And the only thing that can hit your plane as fast as that, hit all systems, is an electric arc. And you can already see multiple evidence of that. because you have the aft EAFR burnt to cinders. Its housing, connectors, everything burnt. Now, the forward EAFR is the one which saw the impact of the crash. It saw the fire. That you managed to take 42 hours of recorded data from it. But from the aft, you got nothing. And there's no visible sign of fire. The tail section is intact. There's no visible sign of fire. So what happened? Why you're not telling us what burnt? So there should be a fire residual analysis, right, after a crash of this magnitude. So this is selective disclosure of data, where they're only telling you what they want you to hear, so that you will think everything was normal with this plane, everything's fine, don't look this way, only blame the pilot. Because every single data point, if you look at, it is for a narrative. The first thing they say is about the fuel switch, but if you look at the cockpit conversation, they don't even mention fuel or switches. How AIB gaslights you into thinking it's about the fuel switch is by mentioning fuel switches 19 times in a 15-page report. But if you actually read the cockpit conversation, it only says, why did you cut off? There's no reference to fuel or to a switch. Then the second thing they do is they selectively talk about EAFR. So if it is going to be it like the flap angle, which was at 5 degrees, or the thrust levers being in forward, they will give you that data, because they're playing on the fact that you may not know, you may not have the information that GE actually changed the Boolean gating condition. The thrust levers don't need to be in forward. Even thrust reversers can be in idle. It can be either thrust levers or thrust reversers for FedEx to command TCMA. So for the audience to make up its mind that FedEx commanded the fuel cutoff, they are playing with this information asymmetry. They want to tell you that the flight control logic was never compromised, but it actually was. Because for everything that will tell you about the flight control logic, they'll give you the physical position. So for landing gears, they say physical position wasn't down. Reversal levers stowed. Wiring from toga and auto throttle again. So there you see every single thing that can tell you whether the flight control logic got compromised. They will give you the physical position to make you believe everything was normal with this plane. But when it comes to EAFR data, they will only give you something which supports pro Boeing, pro Air India thing. So I really believe that this is a fleet-wide issue. Why I feel it's a fleet-wide issue is that since the history of the plane itself is 9 known incidents with the Dreamliners. One was on June 16th. It was the Hong Kong to Delhi flight, AI 310. Then there was a June 25th incident where a United Airlines flight flying from Washington Dulles to Munich, there was a mid-air engine shutdown. Then you had the October 9th incident with the Vienna Delhi flight, which got diverted to Dubai. Then you had November 24th and 27th, you had engine faults with Air India 787s, and the flight, if you see the fault pattern from ACARS, is very similar to what happened on crash flight VTNB, because the exact same models, GPM left 1, GPM left 4, right 4, and CMCF, which is the computer fault monitoring system, the same systems were again problematic. And then you have 3 uncommanded RATs. Now, RAT, again, your emergency power failing before main engines failed is a clear sign of an electrical disturbance on the plane, and you had 3 uncommanded RATs. So this plane has a well-documented history of electrical failures. Unfortunately, there's a power asymmetry because of the money involved, because Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal are well-established players. And at this point, there is enough money in the network to shut down voices like, be it Captain Amit or Captain Sumit's father, who has made a remarkable case, given he's a DGCA official himself. So right now they're playing on the lack of asymmetry and the fact that they have so much money power backing them to shut down the truth.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Let me come to Captain Amit. The observations and excellent investigative work that Rachel has done raises a fair amount of questions, which is about again, we come back to the redundancy that's available in the aircraft in case of failures and the alert systems, because it's a heavily electrical intensive, it's an all electric aircraft. And is there, and this you pointed out even in your blog as well, a massive single point failure risk could lead to a catastrophic situation like both the engines being shut down, or any other major catastrophic failures that could actually happen. That how did how do you look at that? Because to me, this is a massive safety issue, and this should have been actually identified and shut down right at the design stage itself or the flight testing and clearance stages itself. Captain Amit? Yeah.
Sorry. So I'd like to start with the foundation. Before we go on to Boeing and FAA or NTSB, let's look at what we have in India. As we have seen in the past, every time there's a pressure on the system collapses. We may be resilient, but there's something called anti-fragility, which is missing. The system is so fragile that it collapses, we come back, but we don't learn from what happened. So we repeat the mistakes every time, be it fog or accidents. So we just look at the proximate cause. That is the natural human tendency called bounded rationality. We look for satisfying the first reason for the accident or the cause of the event. We catch on to that. We don't go to the root cause. So we always address the symptoms and don't go for the root cause. So every accident or incident or occurrence has the same pattern. I say Indian aviation is built on stilts because the foundation is so weak. We do not have institutions which churn out professionals. That is why we do not still, after so many years, more than 7 decades of independence, we cannot independently evaluate an aircraft. As per regulation, as per ICAO regulation, every state must independently evaluate an aircraft. But we accept an aircraft based on FAA certification or EASA certification. So we say they must have done the due diligence. So we have seen how FAA has been working in cahoots with Boeing, or Boeing has been working on behalf of FAA. So that is the problem. If we blame Boeing, then we must blame ourselves also. That why couldn't we detect all these things in the design issue? I'll give you an example. The 737, Captain Ajit may appreciate the annunciator panel in front of the pilot that lights up whenever there is a system related issue. If there's an issue with the hydraulics, there's a hydraulic light which lights up, or a door light, or electrical light. So FAA design requirement is that at critical stages of flight, the pilot should not get multiple alerts in front of him. So that is why all modern aircrafts have ICAS or ECAM, which at certain speeds basically does not display certain information, and only critical, safety critical information is displayed. Now Boeing didn't have it when they designed the 737 in the 70s. So they took an exemption from FAA for this panel, annunciator panel. If you see the MAX now, that panel is the same from the 1970s, whereas the entire cockpit has been redesigned. So why is that? Because if you want to change that annunciator panel, you have to install the ICAS, and for that you'll have to recertify the aircraft. So recertification is a problem. So after the MAX issue, FAA said nothing doing. For the MAX 1000, we will not give you certification unless you install an ICAS. So Boeing said, okay, we will go to the Congress. So they went to the Congress and they kind of blackmailed them that if you do not give us this permission, so many jobs will be lost because orders will be cancelled, etc. So there was a compromise which was reached that, okay, we will give you certification, but after 1 year or so, you'll have to retrofit the aircraft with ICAS. So why couldn't they do it earlier? It is basically a matter of ethics. There is a ruling in the US courts. Till 2016, Boeing had immunity from third-party design defects. So like the batteries of the 787 were produced by EASA in Japan. So the Boeing had immunity because if there's a defect arising from the third-party manufacturing, they had immunity. So right from 737-200s, where they had accidents in the US with the rudder design issue, and the 747, the center tank blew up, the 787, the MAX, but still they paid out millions because they knew that it was their problem and they knew about design defects. It is only the recertification cost that they were trying to save. So it is a matter of ethics. So India has to develop their own systems so that we can have better professionals and better ethical standards, and not given to a Boeing or a Wall Street Journal or anybody else. So that capability has to be developed as soon as possible, so that we do not see more of these incidents and accidents. Having said that, the 787 per se was, I've spoken to very senior professionals in Boeing commercial. They said we pushed the aircraft because of competition. So the MAX was competing with the Neos, A320 Neos. The 787 was competing with the 350s. So the 350s got released, and 787s, they were not fully ready, but they said, okay, we'll push into service and then we'll see whatever issues come up, we'll sort them out later. So their design basically of taking the nickel cadmium or the lithium ion batteries, so that is one of the key decisions that is affecting the whole aircraft. And like Boeing, they persist because they think that their capability and the size and the backing of US matters, so whatever they say is right. But like I said, India has to again individually evaluate whether this is acceptable for our country or not. Or if they want design changes, they can always tell Boeing that if we have to order hundreds of 787s, then we want certain design changed. So that is also possible, provided we have the capability to do that. In this particular accident, again, there are two things, the technical part and the narrative. Narrative we have seen enough, but to a common man, it is very simple to explain that if an aircraft is accelerating, the max speed recorded is 180 knots, and soon after that, one engine is cut off, 1 second, the second engine is cut off. So basically, after max speed of 180 knots, basically 3 seconds later, the second engine is cut off. How can the max speed be attained before the engines are cut off? Max speed will be attained at or after the engine is cut off. So nobody is pointing out the basic thing which a layman should understand. Now, to go into the nitty-gritties, they have very carefully chosen the words in the report so that they cannot be faulted, but they have placed the words such that the narrative is built and the common man understands their narrative, not what the reality is. So if you see everywhere, they have quoted as per AFR, which is a black box. So aircraft got airborne at 3.9 as per AFR. Then they say the max recorded speed was 180 knots, and then again the fuel control switches transition. So why didn't they write 180 knots as per AFR? And why did they write recorded speed? Because that is the last good speed which was available. The aircraft would have accelerated to about 190, 195 knots. But that was the last good speed which was recorded. So that is why they have written recorded speed. And the RAT deployed soon after. So all these things have to be read very carefully. We can basically tell you what happened based on the preliminary data and past failures of this 787 engines. So if an engine, this is a huge engine, if it spools down, it takes about 10 to 12 seconds for the electrical system to knock off. So it cannot be that the engine is shut down and the RAT deploys immediately. Here the RAT deployed first, engines shut down as a consequence of the electrical issues, right? So these things have to be, the report, anybody who reads the report very carefully will identify all these things. Like the flap, they say, as per AFR, the flap was at position 5, and which is confirmed by the flap lever position in the wreckage. But for the landing gear, they do not quote the AFR. They say landing gear lever was down and they show the gear position. So why couldn't they write as per AFR? Because the landing gear was selected down and then selected up after takeoff. That can be seen with the bogie position or the truck. The normal process of retraction of landing gear is you put the lever up, the signal goes for the truck or the bogie to go into the flight mode. So when the aircraft takes off, the bogie is tilted up. So it has to tilt down, the doors open, then the landing gear goes down. So in the visuals, we have seen in the later visuals that the bogie is tilted down. So tilted down means the lever was selected up and the process was interrupted, possibly by some electrical short circuit. So that the doors did not open and the gate did not go down. So that all these things have to be looked at very carefully, and not nobody's. If you try to fault anybody, the Indian government or AIB, they will say we never said that it was a pilot issue, but without saying, they're not saying that this is a wrong or what AIB or Wall Street Journal is saying is wrong. Nobody has come out categorically. So they're neither denying nor approving. And the last point I would say is the EFR. The first EFR was recovered on the 13th, the second on the 16th. ICAO says, and anybody's logic would say, if you have data in your hand, you should milk the data, analyze it as soon, because it contains critical information for all the thousands of 787s which are flying. But they were kept in Ahmedabad from 13th to 24th. 24th, they were transported to Delhi. Right? So what were they doing in Ahmedabad where there is no lab? And then on 23rd, the golden chassis and cables were brought from the US. Without opening the black box, how could you determine that the module inside the crash-proof container is damaged? And that we need a golden chassis? So these things are, all these things do not tie up. So we need more information for that.
Okay, these are uncomfortable questions. Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. But let's come to the, why is this, to look at the narrative that's being built up. Let me come to Mr. Raghotaman. How much do you think is the larger geopolitical interests are in play? And will that hamper the investigations significantly? Because it's about Indo-US relations, it's about business, it's about Air India, it's about Boeing. And we all know that Air India had placed an order for 470 Boeing aircraft a couple of years ago. And therefore, will that play a role in how this investigation is being pushed? Is one, will those pressures come into play? Will the governments be involved as well? But more importantly, the media narrative that's being built up, this seems to be a pattern in all accidents. We've lost 242 people. And if you go back into the 737 MAX, once again, 166 and 170 people, lives were lost. So the interests of big players like Boeing seem to be overriding the issue of justice for people or families who lost their loved ones in the accident. How do you look at this geopolitical angle coming into play where these issues are given a short shrift? Raghutam.
Absolutely. An accident of this magnitude and involving players like Boeing, FAA, and the US government in this case. The moment the accident happened, my first thought was they're going to shut down the investigation. They're going to sort of not let the truth come out. So that was maybe as a journalist, that's the first thought that comes to your mind, because the stakes involved are extremely high for Boeing, for FAA, for the US government as well. There is a lot of geopolitics involved in this, and for Air India and the Indian government as well. As Captain Amit Singh was saying, the government and AIB are neither denying nor confirming any of these information, nor are they responding to anybody. Firstly, I have to congratulate Rachel on the wonderful work that she has done and standing alone. I've been doing some test work myself, and I've come to more or less the same conclusion that Rachel did. But she has gone ahead and spoken to a lot of people, done the journalistic legwork, and done a superb job. The point is, nobody else is picking up her story. That's the problem with this whole thing. I mean, we don't need to blame the US media for this. In fact, if you remember, when the MAX crashes happened, it was the same Wall Street Journal which actually did the investigative series on the MAX crashes. The leaks that have happened this time to the Wall Street Journal, the journalist involved should have been much more careful in looking at the sources, looking at what is involved, and probably done a better job as Rachel here has done. That the failure must be of the individual journalist, not of a Wall Street Journal as such. That's what I would like to believe at this point of time. But coming to the geopolitics part of it, as I said, the stakes are extremely high for Boeing. After the MAX crashes, if this one also turns out to be Boeing's not just fault, but criminal negligence, right? Then Boeing's reputation will be dealt a death blow. This will be the sort of end of Boeing as such, right? At least the civilian aircraft manufacturer called Boeing. So that's huge stakes. If it turns out, and as Rachel's work has shown, as a lot of the understanding that Captain Ajit and Captain Amit have, and my own research has shown, it turns out that it is the electrical system or the software system. This goes right to the root of the design and architecture of the aircraft. Then the entire fleet of Boeing 787s that flies around the world. I think the number is some 1,200 or 1,300 aircraft at this point of time. They will all have to be grounded, right? So the stakes are extremely high for Boeing as such. Then there is the stakes for FAA, because FAA has been shown, as Captain Ajit was describing. If the regulator offloads its job to the manufacturer himself and lets the manufacturer himself, certify his own product, then that's a huge issue for the reputation of the Federal Aviation Administration. I mean, the whole world has relied on FAA certification for saying this is the gold standard. This is what everybody should follow. So as Captain Amit was saying, we don't even test once the FAA has given the thing. So at a time when there is a huge standards war going on, right, between US, China, Europe, if it turns out that FAA failed in terms of its job, then that's a huge blow again to the whole standards war that's happening. Again, the US loses. The American government itself, for the American government itself, it's a huge stake because Boeing is the lone American manufacturer of aircraft of this magnitude, right? And if it goes down, there are two global manufacturers, Airbus and Boeing. If one of them go down, who benefits from that? Nobody benefits actually. But then China is coming up with the COMAC aircraft C919 and the other aircraft. So China benefits. So the stakes for the American government are huge. Within the American government, we have seen President Trump going around saying, "I am the greatest salesman for Boeing. I have sold so many aircraft." In 2019 or 2020, when the Air India and Indigo orders were placed for 470 aircraft, the Prime Minister Modi made it a point to call up the US president and say, "Look, India has given you so many orders," right? So that's the level at which these stakes have to be measured in this case. So what Rachel has sort of brought out, does not remain a journalist story. It becomes a huge geopolitical question for everyone. And the stakes are extremely high for all involved, including Air India, because apart from Boeing's manufacturing choices, the software design choices, the TCMA in this case, like MCAS in the 737 MAX, here the TCMA comes into the picture. Then there are the various manufacturing defects that whistleblowers have pointed out. The maintenance issues, the FAA's failure to categorize defects properly, right? Just like the 2018 directive, which said you can ignore the fuel switch issue, right? So there is a whole lot of stuff. And then there are the proximate causes. As Rachel's investigation has showed, there were problems with the aircraft from starting from 3 years before the crash. Then there were problems within the last 48 hours of the crash, and there were even bigger problems with the BPCU, right? Within 15 minutes of the flight. So if all of these come out, and it is the question is raised: why did Air India and Boeing let the aircraft fly? So it becomes a huge problem for Air India also. Although the Tatas might not be at fault for a lot of things that happened before they bought the airline.
Yeah,
right? So there is an immense lot of lot at stake for the Indian government. There is again a humongous amount at stake because we are going through a very difficult phase in relations with the US. We have been, as Captain Amit was saying, the reason why the Indian government will neither deny nor confirm anything is because there is a behind the scenes negotiation that is going on, right, on what to do with this problem of the AI 171 crash. How do we deal with it so that the relationship stays without damage? How do you get the trade deal done? How do you get the bigger strategic relationship? How do you maintain that? Those have become the problems. Therefore, the Indian government thinks it's better to be silent rather than to open the mouth, right? So there is a lot at stake for the Indian government as well. So therefore, we must expect. Governments have a choice between pursuing the truth and pursuing the national interest as they define, right? And governments generally choose the national interest as they define it, rather than the truth. It is us citizens, us journalists, us citizens, pilots, who have to stand for the look for the truth in this whole matter. The governments won't do it, so it will be our fight to get to the bottom of this whole thing.
Thank you, Robert. Let me come to Captain Ajit Akte. Ajit, sir, can you flag this? Let's come back to the design and the redundancy aspect of it, which is the single point failure seems to be failure risk seems to be one of the most visible problems in this aircraft design. And how do we, how did 1100 aircraft get sold? And as Rachel pointed out, there's been series, and even as Captain Amit pointed out, there's been series of problems in the aircraft ever since it came into the scene in 2003 or 2005, if I'm right. And so what would be the way forward for Boeing to be able to really address a problem which I see is the lack of adequate redundancy in the aircraft design? Am I right in looking at that? Can you hear me, sir?
See, Marty, I don't think there's a lack of redundancies in the sense that the electrical system per se has enough and more redundancies. It's like Amit was saying a while ago that it takes, if the engines fail, it takes a while for the electricals to fall off. But what if the electrical short circuits and gets cut off? That can happen if there is a major water leak into the E&E bay. That will lead to a complete shutdown. And sadly, that shutdown causes the FADEC to shut down the engines. Now, that kind of a thing has never even been addressed, I suppose. Now, when flight testing, etc., was done, I don't think anybody ever addressed the issue that there's likely to be water leak from the toilet into the E&E bay. So these are the things, you see. So the electrical system per se may have its own redundancies, but who imagined at that stage this is the case? And FAA has issued advisories on this. Now I'm talking on the basis of what has been documented in issues. An issue which has been documented. It is documented that there is likely to be a leak and therefore you do something. But how about solving that issue? So the point is this, that this is something which needs to be addressed. And Boeing has to come out openly, clearly, and honestly do this, and not in piecemeals and bits and pieces because somebody has found out something, they come up that this is actually happening. So these are issues that need to get, yeah.
But Ajit sir,
Yeah,
let me actually just flag some of the observations from NTSB on 787. And they are firstly comparing it also. We all know the mil specs and the flying defense standards with respect to civilian aircraft requirements. So they very clearly measure and stipulate what should be the failure rates that are acceptable. But NTSB has flagged saying the failure rate, technical failure rate that 787 is prone is 30x higher than its competitors like Airbus 350. That's one. There is a chronic electrical system vulnerabilities creating a cascade risk, which is what Rachel will talk about on this single point failure issue. So that is a vulnerability that's also been flagged. All these are quite some years back. And there are documented structural defects in 1,000+ aircraft. Then there are software-driven control system unpredictability. And there is manufacturing quality failures across fragmented supply chain. These are not our observations. They are their own observations. How are the aircraft flying?
that's the issue. That's the issue. And they themselves have found, you see, there are design deficiencies, there are manufacturing deficiencies, and then there are deficiencies from the regulator side. So all these put together, sometime, somewhere, something will give.
That's true. So then that raises a question as to what about our regulators' roles and our government's role? If these
Which is
information was already
exactly what
available.
Captain Amit has brought out to say that we need to have in-house expertise to be able to determine what has been given to us or what we are going to go into meets our requirements or not. We presently accept FAA as gold standard. Now, as time has proven that FAA standards actually are not gold standard. But then who's to decide? So we need to have our own in-house organization which will go ahead and determine whether what is being given to us meets our requirements or not.
Absolutely. Yeah, Rachel, you were wanting to comment on the single point failure.
So the single point of failure, Boeing was well aware of the fact that its common core system has the single point of failure, and they warned about this internally in a 2014 note. Now you fast forward to 2020, there is a cybersecurity firm in the US, the IOA Active, they also warned about this. Now only after this, so Boeing already knew about the problem in 2014, but only after IOA Active made its research public in 2020 did FAA come out with a warning saying, you know, if you want to avert a problem with the common core system failing, then you need to do a power recycle every 51 days. Okay, so but this comes as an afterthought. It did not come, it was not proactive. And also the FAA is not proactive, and the Indian government just, our DGCA just accepts whatever certification FAA gives without looking further into it. And now the first point of failure, single point of failure for this plane was the common core system, of which the core network, which is like a vital component of it, was degraded, and it was marked as a Cat C MEL medium risk on June 9th, 3 days before the crash. Now, the second single point of failure, so there are, Boeing always talks about black box data because they want you to think that's the only set of information available. But actually this plane, not just this plane, every single Dreamliner, thousands of Dreamliners are transmitting live data, a live stream of data, satellite information via SITA, which is the subcontractor for Air India, through the satellite provider Inmarsat, which is a British company, and British lives have been lost here as well, to two people. One is the airline, and in this case, the airline involved is Air India, and the other person is Boeing. So this plane, the ACAS codes on this plane, Captain Amit has put out a brilliant video on this. So if you watch Captain Amit's video, you will see screenshots from the ACAS codes, which clearly show that the satellite information, real-time data on the faults and failures happening on the crash flight were being transmitted live to two places. Aviation Center, the code is Bomasai because earlier it was Bombay, but they've still retained the same BOMASAI. And the second place it goes to is BLBB OCR. That is Boeing's Data Monitoring Center in Belleville, Illinois, US. So while they keep telling us, oh, the black box needs to be analyzed, this has to be done, that has to be done, they are lying to you because they knew exactly what went wrong with the flight the minute it crashed, the second it crashed. So this is just a made up story by them telling us all that, like, you need to rely on black box data, which brings me back to the ACAS code, which will tell you what is the second single point of failure with this flight. Do you know, just like the MAX 737 crash, where there was a single angle of attack sensor, and because that single angle of attack sensor failed, there was the MCAS issue. And then the plane kept on pushing the nose down because it was having only one sensor it was relying on. So identical to that, it's really scary. But this plane also has a single point of failure in the TAT. So the external TAT probe, there's only one external TAT probe on this plane. And you know how they managed to get away with the certification? They told FAA, listen, it's dually backed. It's got both electrical and hydraulics. But guess what? On this plane, the hydraulics and electricals failed together. Because the landing gear, the command was given to retract it, like there was already there are two hydraulic pumps, EMPs on this plane, the left and the right. And the left was already faulting pre-takeoff. And then obviously the right was on the R2 line, and given the burnt condition of the aft AFR, we can probably guess that also took a hit along with it. So now even this ACARS code was headed with a letter EM R012. And 12 is usually the number indicator for channel 12, which is the TAT probe. So at some point, there was airspeed data failure, likely airspeed data failure on this plane. And this is because it has a single TAT probe. And the reason they get away with it is because there's not enough information out there. Just like there was a single angle of attack sensor, there's a single TAT probe on this plane, and that has not been fully examined because guess what? All three flight control modules. So how they got away with it was by saying, oh, the flight control modules, so you have left and right, and then you have the cross verification by the center one. But they don't tell you that all three computers are dependent on the same external TAT probe. So how is that triple redundancy? So this is where Boeing is playing on information asymmetry that the public doesn't know.
Important issue on redundancy, and of course, very clearly, this is an issue that needs to be looked at. But Captain Amit, I just want to raise a few questions. One is, of course, the advisory that came in 2018, which is regarding the fuel control switches, and saying it is advisory and not mandatory. It's quite obvious that it should have been implemented. So the role of DGCA and Air India comes into the picture. But I want to flag few observations. Post the accident, the DGCA's inspection audit findings indicates Air India's safety management inadequacy. There are 51 deficiencies, 7 level 1 and 44 level 2. And apart from other observations on training deficiencies, unapproved simulators, crew scheduling failures, and of course further incidents which raise concern in December as well as there is a systemic compliance culture failures. Of course, as you pointed out, Air India has just taken over. Probably it has inherited some of these from the earlier organization as well. But in an airline business is a serious, you're dealing with lives of people, and therefore safety should be paramount, not business interests. So how do you look at that? And also on this aircraft, which Rachel has pointed out in all her articles as well, the particular aircraft has had chronic electrical faults over 11 years. In the Air Force, at least, we've had the culture of any snag repeats itself, it's an alarm. And if it repeats for the third time, you've got to take it off completely and investigate thoroughly. And you don't let it fly until the whole problem is resolved. How do you account for these observations? Captain Amit?
Well, these are very serious issues, but the whole issue is safety is all about perception. If you perceive, two people might have different perception. If you're crossing a road, a busy road, an Indian crossing a road and an expat crossing a road. So Indian who's used to crossing a road, weaving through the traffic, will not see it as a safety issue, but somebody from outside will say this is a big safety issue. So it is all about perception. To remove that perception, we have the safety management system, and now we have the risk numbers. So performance, earlier it was safety management, now it is the performance of the safety management system, which means you have to document the numbers. It cannot be left to one individual's perception. It is done in a group and numbers are put down so that there is a review and ensure that the numbers are going down consistently. When you say that safety management system was flagged as an issue, I'd like to say that it is a failure of the safety system. So the whole system should have been shut down and restarted. If you find a problem in one equipment or one department, that's a different issue. But the entire safety sits inside the safety management system. So that is why it is called a system, because it has individual components. Now, if you find the problem is in the whole thing, which means everything inside is faulty. So you have to look at safety as encompassing everything. The whole process of managing safety is through the safety management system, including fatigue risk management and components and airworthiness. So everything, every department has an individual from the safety system. So saying that the safety system is not working, that is also because of the understanding of the regulator. The regulator has to have that understanding. And if you see the performance, India has said that our in the last IQ audit of 2022, the percentage of surveillance EI score that has gone up from 69.7% to 85%, and we have done very well. But nobody reads inside the report. If you go inside the report, there is one question: how many accidents in the last 5 years in 2022? The answer is 0 accidents. But Calicut accident happened in 2020. So if you're giving IQ the wrong data, so your score will naturally increase. AAIB, which is the investigation body, was not audited. Aerodromes have got unsatisfactory. Performance-based navigation, unsatisfactory. When it comes to safety, there are two parts. One is self-evaluation, in which they have given themselves 100%. And second part is foundation of safety, which is unsatisfactory. So what I'm saying is that understanding of safety is not there. The conceptual understanding is not there. We're just managing somehow on paper that yes, we are doing everything, but practically we are failing every time. Now, the 320s in Indigo, the Pratt & Whitney engines, they had a very high failure rate. And fortunately, only one engine used to fail at a time. But there was no standard or methodology that DGCA used to determine whether there is a risk to the traveling public or not. It just kept on giving extension after extension. So that failure rates kept on increasing to an alarming level, but the regulator did not do anything. Whereas there are methods available in which you can forecast the risk. One thing which came up in the MAX crashes was that FAA using, they have a methodology called TARAM, which is Transport Airplane Risk Analysis Methodology. And they had predicted that in the lifetime of the MAX, there would be about 15.4 crashes and kill over 2,900 people. So that was acceptable to them. So that in the lifetime of the MAX, so that is their prediction. So somebody has to come out with a similar number which is acceptable to us. ICAO says by 2050, we are aiming at 0 fatalities. But the way we are going, we cannot achieve that because we don't know what's happening with us. because unless you document something and stand by it or have a process, so we cannot have a grip on safety. If you look at India, someday helicopter crashes, then a number of flying school crashes, then the private jet crashes, then the airliner crashes. So the scatter is too big, too wide. So to group the scatter, control the scatter is difficult. If the grouping is small, then you can control it. But here it is too wide. So who has oversight on safety? And because it is the regulator ultimately who's responsible for safety. So the buck stops at them, and they themselves are kind of short on knowledge, competency, and of course surveillance is not there. And that is where all these things arise. Like Air India, the 320 flew without a certificate of airworthiness. How did it happen? Again, the report said systemic failure. So we have systemic failure after systemic failure, and nobody is getting alarmed. So the minister says everything is fine, no need to worry. When you yourself are saying there are systemic failures, which means the whole system has collapsed. So I don't know if their understanding of what a system is something different from our understanding or the books, what the book says. So while there is no kind of public debate or interaction, the regulator or the government is not open to any interaction. If you read their own book, the DGCA book says that the powers with the DGCA are basically belonging to the people. They have been delegated to the DGCA for governance. So that is the doctrine which is written in their own manuals. And this is the way they are dealing with people's lives. It has to be looked at a higher level, not just from the ministry, but from the top, that is this what we are projecting to the world? Because the preliminary report was quite laughable, the whole world was laughing. But if you speak to them, they said it was a world-class report. So denial, is it deliberate denial or under pressure, or they have something, a scheme or a way forward, something roadmap worked out? We are looking at kind of short-term policies and short-term goals. Nobody has a long-term roadmap. That is another issue. That is why we want to say that yes, we have built so many airports, we have bought so many aircrafts, but in the long term, do we have the personnel, trained personnel, competent personnel? Since we do not have institutions, how do we get those people? Nobody is looking at those aspects. We're just looking at what can we buy off the shelf and project to the world for short-term game.
Absolutely. Okay. I would request the audience, if you have any questions, please raise them on the chat box or raise your hand, and you can come online and then raise the questions to the panelists as well. There is a question from, there's an observation from Captain Arvind Oak, another Air Force veteran and test pilot as well. He's saying the IAF has extensive test and evaluation facilities. Their test crews are trained to carry detailed evaluation, and with the new aircraft being developed, design facilities will also increase. How can an evaluation body be set up independent of DGCA? So either Captain Ajit Akhte or Captain Amit, both of you can comment if you.
I will take this on by saying that, look, yes, we have the trained people, yes, we have the talent, but eventually the role of this is like FAA is the regulator, and they do what needs to be done in the USA. DGCA is the organization here, and they have to have their house in order. Fundamentally, what Captain Amit has brought out is the fact that the house is not in order.
That's
the so whatever organization you set up, it doesn't. DGCA is the regulator. It actually has to. This is a regulatory function where you need to evaluate an aircraft and determine. The regulator has to determine whether it meets muster or doesn't meet muster.
Absolutely. So
We
it's
have
not only
people
the
that know the
robustness of the regulatory organizations or system as a whole, but also I think the political environment also matters. Captain Amit, do you want to say something on this?
Yeah, so it is the political will. If there's a will, we can do anything. If you can launch satellites, why can't we do this? So the people at the regulator, to evaluate an aircraft, you should have a higher level of understanding of systems and how they are developed. So it is not somebody uh, from an engineering background. There have to be, like I said, institutions have to be there, PhD level, who have done in-depth research. For example, automation. Uh, we are making pilots who are operators of automation. Like if you press a switch, this will happen. If the switch disengages or the fault, you follow this checklist. But the people who are experts in automation say that you have to teach people of use of automation, misuse of automation, disuse of automation, abuse of automation. So do not become just an operator of a switch. You have to understand what's going on there, because ultimately AI has to come, and autopilot is also quite moody. So AI will be another person in the cockpit. You have to understand how the behavior of AI will be, uh, and how the systems, sometimes the system hangs, doesn't work, you have to shut down, pull the CB, switch off. So this deeper level of understanding has to be there. And a separate body has to be set up with well qualified people for the long run, because if we have to develop an aircraft, ultimately our goal has to be to develop our own aircraft, civilian aircraft, and compete with the world. So unless you start preparing, or you should have started preparing 50 years back, if you take on uh, the Boeing or Airbus or Embraer, then you should start now with a set of well qualified people, and the will, of course, has to be there.
That's true. And there's the Mr. Gupta's Indrajit Gupta is raising another question. How can oversight of DGCA and AIB be strengthened? What is Parliament's role? Yeah, Raghutam, you want to say something? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to tie up these two thoughts, one about the redundancy and one about what Captain Amit Singh just said about AI coming in. One of the things that will happen if in this case it is proven and it becomes public that it was the electrical and software systems that were at fault, then it becomes a problem for the whole industry, because the choices about human machine interface, what Captain Amit was talking about, those will have to be relooked at, and the industry can't proceed very quickly on that line. Whereas they want to do that, right? They want to move quickly on automation and AI and all that stuff. That will get hit across the industry, whether it is Boeing or Airbus or Embraer or whoever else it is. So that is another big thing at stake here for the industry completely.
That's true. But I would also now, in the context of Mr. Indrajit Gupta's question, I want to flag a particular issue, which is, if you've seen the Netflix documentary on Boeing, The Downfall, which is largely the entire 737 MAX story is very well brought out there. The US has a robust mechanism and system where Congress finally raises questions, forces the Boeing to release all the data,
Yes.
and then they actually were now brought to a stage where they were criminally prosecuted, could be prosecuted. They were accused of criminal negligence in the entire process. And then the other process, which is typical of American process, took over. Do we have that kind of a strength? And I believe we don't have that kind of a strength. So when you're dealing with, irrespective of what national interests will dictate in terms of international relations or the relations between two countries, and therefore some businesses will have to be looked at from that angle, you still have to come down to the brass tacks of looking at people's lives and passengers' safety. Airlines have to actually measure up to unquestionable safety standards. And if the supplier has violated in the quality of the product, or the airline has failed in its safety standards, the organizations and the regulators and the parliament will have to step in to set that process right? And therefore, the media's, narrative building again comes into the picture that needs to be, the narratives can be influenced, and that is exactly what we are seeing in this particular case. So, how do you think that we probably will be able to address this weakness? Raghutam, yeah.
I'm not very hopeful of being able to address this in India. In fact, if you look at the current situation, the victims' families have gone to the U.S. Court, the Delaware court, to get justice for themselves, and they have taken on Boeing and GE rather than the government of India. And we don't have a system of class action suits in this country. Even in the nuclear liability law, we haven't created a system for class action suits, right? So I'm not very hopeful that we will get our act together on this. We'll have to depend on the U.S. system to get things worked out on this one, which is a sad state of affairs, basically. But when you say criminal negligence, even there is a certain limit to up to which the U.S. system will also work. After that, even in the 737 MAX cases, Boeing just paid a fine of $2.5 billion and got away with it. Right? There was no criminal, action against Boeing. They made a compromise. So that's where the U.S. Justice system also ends. That's the final thing. So this is a very grave situation that we are in. That justice can't be done to the fullest extent as we generally desire.
Absolutely. So we have we are coming to the end of our time, but let me flag the issue that we are in a situation where things are still open-ended, because the Bloomberg article probably gives a hint at how things, as Raghutam pointed out, that the larger interests or national interests may actually suppress the real process, but I hope that doesn't happen. But what is interesting is Boeing's initial comment, which is very similar to what happened in the 737 MAX case, as Raghutam pointed out, is that the initial statement, we must read that carefully. They said that we will defer to India's AIIB in adherence with UN International Civil Aviation Organization protocol known as Annex 13. What does that translate, or what is real meaning being conveyed? It means Boeing is allowing the investigation to develop conclusions. If pilot error narrative prevails, Boeing is exonerated. If design defects emerge, Boeing's position of deferral allows it to claim neutrality. Let's decide what that means. And let me invite last 1 minute, 30 seconds concluding remarks from each of the panelists. Captain Ajit Akte. Ajit sir, you can go ahead with your final comments on this.
The only way out is we have to go about it honestly, openly, and whatever the facts emerged have to be analyzed properly and put across. If it's a bitter pill we have to swallow, so be it. If it's a bitter pill that Boeing has to swallow, so be it.
Thank you. Rachel, your final comments?
But it's AIB, they are all, it's an incestuous relationship. For instance, many people may not be aware that the parent company of Air India, Tata Group, owns also Tata Aerospace. And Tata Aerospace is the one providing the composite frames for the 787, which means that being a supplier, a client to Boeing, it is also in Tata's interest for more Boeing planes to be sold. So it is very incestuous. You don't know who is married to whom. So it's a very close, tied up this. And on top of that, you have the trade deal. You have Trump versus Modi. So there's lots of dynamics at play. So my only advice to anyone would be to read the AIB report for themselves, because everything that you need to know about the fact that there was an electrical failure on the plane is there in the AIB report itself. Like your starting clue can be that the emergency transmitter ELT never activated during the event, which means something happened to it prior to the event. So there are all these clues there. You just need to follow the clues. It's a breadcrumb trail, and the AIB report itself will tell you how the crash happened and why the crash happened.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, the Tata's business relations with Boeing makes it far more complex, the whole issue. Captain Amit, your final comments?
So India has to lay down their standards. They did not say that we favor Boeing or Airbus or any other aircraft. They just have to define their own design standards, that the aircraft which flies in India must have multiple redundancies, should not suffer from the single point issues. So these kind of standards, the companies have to then analyze that which aircraft fits best in the Indian environment, because we are responsible for our safety. So the best amount safety is the human being. Human machine interface experts say that whenever there is an accident, incident, or problem, there is no need to design another engineering control, because the problem is, if the problem is with the human being, you have to correct the human being. But this is another lobby of the design thing, that we build a new software, a new modification, make it more complicated. So we have to make our own rules, and they have to comply with our rules. So whoever comes in.
Thank you. Mr. Raghutam, your final comments?
I think, as I said, governments will choose national interest over, the truth. The ethics of responsibility, so to say, overcome the ethics of conscience. But I think we as citizens, we as media must demand that, even if the AIB wants to conclude that it's pilot error, let it do so transparently. Let it bring out the FDR original recordings, the CVR original recordings. Let them not give us paraphrased, single bits of conversation. And then say this is what happened, right? Or not let the whole world speculate about what happened. Let them bring out all of it, put it all in the public domain, and then let them come to the conclusion that it was pilot error or pilot suicide or whatever.
Thank you, Mr. Raghutam. And it's been a wonderful panel discussion today we've had, very rich. And I thank all the panelists for their time and excellent comments in this entire process. Thank you very much. And let me hand over to Bhavna for the concluding session.
Thank you, sir.
Bhavna? Yeah.
On behalf of TPF, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to our speakers and moderator for such a comprehensive and insightful overview of the civil aviation landscape. Thank you for thoughtfully addressing the discussion objectives and for sharing perspectives that added real depth and clarity. I'm confident that each of us is walking away with valuable takeaways from today's session. Thank you once again to all our speakers. I would also like to thank our participants for being an engaged and interactive audience. We look forward to seeing you at TPF's next event. Lastly, sincere thanks to my fellow TPF members for ensuring a smooth session today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Bhavna.